So here we're going over, now that we've gone through the valuation intro and evaluation example, the other part of this is we can see, okay, so what actually impacts firm value, right? And we said that in reality that could be the earnings growth, right? Earnings growth, a lot of times that's what it ends up being, right? So how can you measure earnings growth? It's net earnings, right? It could be net earnings. Another thing that people really look at that drives profitability is the return on equity, right? Because ultimately, if you can deliver more return to shareholders, right? It's in other words, there's two ways, like earnings can really grow, but you could also, for example, have less equity, right? And then your earnings actually returning more per dollar of equity. So it's kind of like, how strong is the equity utilization? And people will say that's return on equity, right? That's called return on equity. So we can also, besides just saying, hey, I want a high earnings growth, we can also break that down even further and say that actually means you want to have a high profit margin, a high asset turnover, and a certain leverage, because those three, that's the DuPont model, as I'm sure you've seen somewhere before, but as applied here with Apple, we can look at the profit margin, and we can kind of say what is driving the return on equity, right? What is driving the return on equity? In other words, how well are they using their assets? It's not just an income measure. How well they're using their assets to generate a return on equity. It's kind of like looking what's on the balance sheet that's causing the income, right? And you could see that it's not just assets, it's not how well you're selling, it's actually also how well you're using leverage. How well are you borrowing and reinvesting that money into assets to create a certain return on equity. So a lot of companies will use that leverage to boost returns, and obviously boosting the return will affect your earnings growth. So that's kind of the strategy at times, is how do I get these higher sales? How do I get this higher income? Well, one thing you could do, you have a good operating model, all you have to do is expand it, so you can borrow funds, expand it, and then you're going to generate more return on equity, right? So this is just another view of what impacts the valuation, more granular on the profitability metrics.